Vertigo, created here at Maya.
So we're going to invite everybody to come check out the show Vertigo. It's between my family and I. Do you want to pan really quick and show them? And it's at the Maya Museum, and it opened on the 1st, and it's here through the 5th, right? But come check it out if you have a chance. It's called Vertigo. Thank you.
The presentation that we put together talks a little bit about Virgil and his career and the things that he's done, along with the Vertigo series that are out on display right now, and how that came about, and a little bit more in-depth information on that as well. So we're going to cover a fair bit of ground, and we're going to try and make it a little bit informal and kind of exciting, and so not just a pure academic presentation, which is what I would do. So Virgil will make it more fun. So first, let's have Virgil introduce all of his family members that are here.
My oldest sister, Joyce Lewis Ortiz. Our dad, Guadalupe. Janice Ortiz. Lisa Holt. She's my niece, and then my nephew is Dominic Ortiz. Nephew Kyle Ortiz. Okay, how would I introduce Harlan? He belongs to Lisa, actually. And then Harlan Riano, and he's from Kibo Pueblo, San Domingo Pueblo. And this is their daughter, Dominic Rio.
I guess now we will get started and talk. You can stay over there.
So I can see.
You can stay right now. So this is what we call in the beginning. So Virgil hates when I show this picture because I think it always drives him a little bit crazy. But this is a really early piece of Virgil's work. It's one of the little bears that he did probably when you were in high school.
When I first got my first apartment, those guys paid all my rent.
I think to understand what he's doing in his contemporary work, it's really great to see where an artist like Virgil starts out from. And then in terms of the figurative pieces and getting involved in that, I'd like to have Virgil talk a little bit about the very first figure that he did with Gonzalez. Gallegos.
Just growing up, all of us always just hung out with our parents, and we never knew it was a form of artwork. We just always seen our mother making the pottery pieces on our kitchen table, so we thought everybody actually did it, and it was no big deal. So we grew up, and we kind of started getting into the gallery scene and understanding what our mom and our dad were doing. But we just kind of always just grew up with it. My parents actually saved some pieces that I made when I was 6 years old. And that money went to buying Star Wars figures. So we learned how to make the traditional, what was traditional in Coach Pueblo, were the seated storyteller figures. I think probably everybody knows what that is. And more of the utilitarian stuff as far as jars and storage jars and water bowls. I learned how to construct those pieces, and then in turn I just wanted to make pieces that were actually standing. That's a little bit harder than making it sitting, so I went about my way and kept on making the standing figures, and then that attracted this collector. His name is Bob Gallegos. Is this bugging you? Can you guys hear me? Bob Gallegos, he has the largest collection of the historic pieces from 1880s of the Coach Pueblo figurines, and he had been a collector of our mothers, and he had came and contacted me and asked me where I was getting all my designs and all the what pieces I was kind of mimicking. I had no idea what he was talking about, so he actually showed me, he invited me to his place, and he showed me his whole collection, and kind of freaked me out because they were very, very similar to the pieces from the 1800s, which none of us were ever exposed to. So he opened his doors and let all of us go in and study all of the designs and all of the stances of the figures, learned about them, like they were all made for based on social commentary. And a lot of the pieces really caught my eye because they were a bunch of freaks, kind of like Siamese twins and tattooed people, half man, half human. But but I eventually learned that they were all based on the Mexican sideshow circuses that were around in the 1800s. So they kind of captured them all in clay, and that's what all these pieces turn out to be. One of my earlier pieces were the very, very traditional. Like each family grows up with their own family designs, motives, and that's more of a traditional one that we did. And then after studying the Bob, then I started trying to connect these pieces and just mimicking the older style. That was one of the first Chinese ones that I made.
So looking at some of the early pieces of Virgil, but a lot of people realized, started doing some of the more sideshow freak pieces. But I think it's probably some of the more provocative pieces that really started to capture people's attention. So pieces like this are the ones that a lot of people seem to always remember and start to associate with Virgil. I'm not going to have to say anything at all. Just moving along after that. In addition to the clay piece, Virgil's also done a lot with fashion, showing in New York and working with Donna Karen. And really over time, a lot of the designs in his fashion are images that are traditional off of the pottery.
They all bounce back and forth, so I kind of don't get bored when I'm doing it. So if I get a little burned out on the pottery, then I switch to fashion, and of course all the designs come off of the pottery and I place them onto the fashion, and it allows me to reach a bigger amount of people to educate them on where the designs came from, which is pottery.
And some of the pottery designs that he's done, maybe within the last 10 years, tend to become sort of iconic imagery that he's created.
She's a character that I created like maybe, I think 7 years ago now, and her name is Tabu, and that's what their grandmothers called their granddaughters and vice versa. But she's the story and the script that I wrote around her. It's going to become a movie, and she's the main character. She is blindfolded because the story starts out with her, and when the Spanish first arrived, converting everybody to Catholicism and all the little kids her age, the girls were all archers. So the conquistadors challenged them to practice shooting, and in the story, all the little girls kicked their butt. So they got really pissed off and blinded all the little kids. So when the Pueblo revolt starts to happen, that's what the whole story is based on. When she's maybe 17 years old, she's the leader of the blind archers. So that the whole story, the whole movie is going to be based on her. I'm just trying to create kind of like almost a superhero for the Pueblo kids to learn the whole story of the Pueblo revolt. So that's who she is.
When you look at imagery like this of Virgil's, you can see also where it also translates into a lot of the fashion that he's done. So he's taken a design that he's created for pottery and things sort of have melded back and forth over time. So I've had the opportunity to work with Virgil for about almost 15 years now. About 10 years ago, Virgil did one of his first solo museum exhibits at the Herd, and it was called the Renaissance Indigene. And Joe Baker, who was the curator of that, wrote, "Ortiz proves himself a postmodern artist with a global perspective, incorporating a number of artistic strategies and conveying his message. Ortiz creates a world of theatrical illusion." And really that speaks to what he's doing in the clothing line and all these different areas that he does, and in the clay work that he's doing. One of the things that I think Virgil really took out of the museum exhibit was the idea of naming the exhibits then and that he would create. And ever since then, I think almost every body of work that he's put together has had a theme. And I think it's really allowed him to explore his work in a totally different manner than just creating another body of work and here's 5 more figures and they go into the gallery and they're sold. He's been able to create a variety of themes, a variety of pieces that have become a cohesive group. And within each one of those groups, the work has continued to grow and change, some being a little bit more provocative. And I want to point out as well that most of the graphics on here are ones that Virgil does himself, now that he has become very proficient in Photoshop, but in creating the ideas for the various shows that he's been doing. So just to give you an idea, I picked a few pieces out of some different shows, and I thought I'd have Virgil talk about a few of those pieces. And again, I think it's sort of leading us up to the current exhibit, and just giving you an idea of sort of the mindset of some of the pieces, and some that I think are both provocative and interesting and technically difficult. So I'll let you make a comment on this one, on the figure that's here.
Well, he's an antelope dancer, my interpretation of it. We do have ceremonies on the Pogo that the antelope dancer performs at. And one of them, there's like a couple of dancers that have to fast for this ceremony. A lot of the younger Native women were very looking at these dancers and kind of commenting on how they were built and the muscles that they had. And it's kind of that's not what it's for, or that's not what it's about, but that's why I built him with having a monocle, like he was under close inspection. And I just imagine that's what they were thinking. What he looked like under his mask, maybe.
One of the very first shows that we did with Virgil was one that was called Saints and Sinners. And I thought we were just doing saints. Virgil called me up really early in the morning and said we were also doing sinners. When we were looking up the saints that he was going to choose to do, we found, I think, the most disturbing ones possible. So this is one of St. Lucy that he created for that exhibit. And you can see as a saint, she's holding eyes in her hand. So he created the figure holding the eyes, and her own eyes.
For their saints, they have to be sinners, so their balance is different.
And this is one of the very first, this is from the same show. This was, I think, the very first jar that Virgil did that had graphic sort of face painting on it.
It was just another way to comment on basically doing it on a pot form rather than doing it in a figure form. And I was again looking at all the different designs that I could create in the figures. So like there's a way that we have to be able to make it turn it into a graphic and put it on a pot. But this was from a line of shoes that I started sketching that hopefully will be produced later.
And one of the styles of imagery that people from the clay people exhibit that was at Wheelwright, and there's a fair number of pieces that sort of have a bondage kind of theme. And that's something, again, that at times people probably focus on too much about Virgil's work. But remember, I think this is from a recent show of his called Tourniquet.
And you would totally think that the younger crowd would be into this, but lo and behold, it's the not so young crowd. Because they have more experience like that. So I'll take the cue from them.
And I wanted to point out this figure as well, because as you look at the very first image that came up there, most of Virgil's pieces up to, and this was from about 2 years ago, he really started to explore some means of creating the pieces, the techniques of putting them together. That was very different than what he'd done in the past. So to create that, and it's all one piece. Then he started doing things like this one with the masks, with additional pieces that he started to add that were also made out of clay. So it became these sort of multiple level sculptures, and he was able to do a lot of different things, both technically with the clay and by adding these other dimensions that you really hadn't seen in his work before.
That stance there, I mean, it was just basically trying to copy what was done in the 1800s, because a lot of the figurative pottery that he did had really crazy stances, and it's hard to imagine how they actually made a balance. So, with having that in mind, I challenged myself to try to balance it in a different way also. So that's where the contortionist figure was born.
So thinking about all of that, it brings us up to the pieces that are part of the current exhibit. Now you kind of have a sense of how to get there. The figures themselves, and this was sort of a question that I had, so I had to do a little bit of research on it. And they're called monos figures. And when you use that word as an adjective, it means cute. And it's meant to suggest a ludicrous gesture or to frighten someone. So a lot of the larger Monos figures like that were used for social commentary, as Virgil said.
Bob Gallegos explained it to us that the Monos also meant like a monkey or a mimicking doll, and also like in the old the state fair games that where you have a hard ball, you throw it at these puppets that you try to knock them over, but that's was kind of what they were molded after. And the older style, if you guys know, a lot of my older pieces are more intricate, but trying to recreate these pieces from the 1800s was really, really cool. A lot of my pieces like that are up to date now, they all have black boots on. They're thigh-high boots almost, but all of the older pieces all have like the trapeze kind of and opera little slippers that they have, which is kind of funny. Also, okay.
Don't give away the secrets. And there's also a cultural aspect to the idea of them being mimicking figures as well. That when they first began, they started making the figures around 1880, and they continued until about 1920. There's a cultural aspect of things like the koshari clowns, the kosa clowns, which are mimicking. It was also a way they think that with the arrival of the trains, that it was a way to sort of make fun of the cultures that were coming into Coche de Pueblo, Mexican and Anglo, other Indian tribes, and sort of a way to deal with multicultural assimilation that was going on at that time. We're really lucky that Bob Gallegos gave me the opportunity to send me some old photos that he had from between 1880 to 1900 of these groups of shots that were taken of the both Cochiti and Tsuke figures. If you want to make comment on any of the imagery that you see, or
I'm just amazed at how all the plots are stacked. It must be nerve-wracking to photograph a bunch of pieces like that.
And it's interesting, here you can see some of the designs and the motion and the scale for some of these pieces was really pretty amazing.
And you notice most of them have a painted backdrop, like the traveling circus sideshow did.
Okay, not for a potty break.
Yeah.
And so we end up with Ben Wittick, who came and took photos of a variety of groups of pieces and created these stage setups. And like Virgil said, using painted backdrops and kind of staging the figures together. And it's this particular photo of Ben Wittick's that inspired Virgil to put together the exhibit and create the figures. And you think, what is it about? This is, I think, a good question for Virgil. It seems like it's been years that you focused on that particular image. What is it about it? What caught your mind to try and begin the idea of recreating that?
I've seen this image before, and it was probably through Bob Gallegos, and it eventually got published in the Clay People book that happened at the World Wide Museum next door. But this image was always burned in my head. And in our travels to Europe, I've been to Prague 5 times. And every time I went across the Charles Bridge, it always spoke to me for some reason, and I couldn't remember where I'd seen it before, or thought I did. So the next couple of times we went, actually Lisa and Harlan traveled with me one time, and Trinity was still not born yet, but she was, how many months? 8 months probably. So Trinity's their younger daughter. She went also. She just didn't know it. But when we went across the Charles Bridge, it always reminded me of the backdrop. So we started taking pictures of it, and I always knew that I was going to recreate this photo somehow.
So how did you get everybody in your family involved to actually make pieces? How did you crack the whip?
I finally let him out of the cage. I gathered everybody and I told them what my idea was, and they thought it was crazy, but had them go through all of the older photographs of the historic pieces pieces to recreate and stay to them as true as possible. But the whole, what we really tried to do was to recreate the photo and show everybody, the public, that we're carrying on the tradition and they're here 130 some years later.
How did you stage the photo? I mean, for the bottom, in the background. So the background is a photo that you took, and then how did you stage everything else together?
Well, when we got the rights to use to print those, the original Wittick photo, then I was able to blow it up and see exactly what was in it. So I kind of figured out that it was just, of course, the backdrop, like the little bright spot right on the right-hand side. It was a sunlight coming in, so they actually took it outside under a tent or something. And that's why you have the ground that's sitting on the grass. So I told Kyle and DJs to go down to the fields and collect the buckets of dirt to haul it back up to the house after all the pieces were completed. And we went in my studio, had them spread it all around, and they still thought it was crazy. What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing with that? And I started telling them to picture it in black and white, but it was hard to convey that to them. They eventually got it, and I had noticed that they were all set in the buffalo hide. We didn't have buffalo hide, so knowing that I have tons of bolts stacked in my studio of all different kinds of fabric, I remembered that one was similar to buffalo hide, but it was very, very light colored, so busted out the black dye. So it was me, DJ and Kyle, dyeing the fabric to look like a buffalo hide, and that worked perfectly. So we had it staged in my studio, and it had the larger pieces all tied up with fishing wire. It was very nerve-wracking to have them all standing next to each other. So I stood up the back ones first, tied them up to the ceiling, staged everything else, and once I got it to mimic this, let me take it, and then right into Photoshop they went, and that's where I got in the pictures that we took when we were from.
And I'd like Virgil to talk a little bit about some of the aspects and kind of quickly of the four figures that he did, and then we'll get the various families to talk about theirs. But some of the things, the scale of what he created is much larger than he'd been working at before in terms of the standing figures. But also some commentary on some of the design elements, because there's some designs and things in your pieces that you hadn't used before. So you mentioned like the shoes, which of course are very cool.
You have matching ones. First of all, I'm just trying to bring back the size of the pieces from the 1800s, and those pieces are huge. If you have a chance to see the original ones, I don't know if you guys seen the technical show, but they're really huge and very robust, and it's just really hard because we never learned that style when we were growing up. So to experiment and teach yourself how to build those pieces was pretty hard, but I think hopefully we'll keep on doing it and trying to mimic the older pieces. And the style of the painting is pretty crazy.
It's like on the arm, or is it different than what you did?
Yeah, it's like what we do, like my normal figures, our normal figures, we paint them with a lot more detail than we're used to, than like the older style there, but to go back and paint that style is really hard also. It was hard to backtrack, but I still think the older style were, of course, the masterpieces, the artists that created them. So.
And then comment a little bit on the hands.
The hands of my normal pieces are all black wearing gloves, but the older pieces, I guess they're also wearing gloves with white gloves. And a lot of the older pieces had breathing holes like that, and I don't know what they were exactly for, and nobody can actually answer them, because a lot of the older people that didn't think the pottery pieces are all gone to their grandmothers, so we really don't know exactly who made them or how they made them or what purposes those were for.
And then to comment a little bit on the faces as well, because the faces are different than something you've done in the past.
Yeah, a lot of the older pieces, all their mouths are open really wide like that. But the back part of this, and we knew we weren't supposed to do that, so take like 8 garbage bag fulls, the 33 gallon size, only the leaves, put them in huge pots, keep them boiling them until you get really, really soggy strain them out, and then that's when we get the juices, and you have to boil them night and day. And as soon as you're completely boils down to maybe a gallon size, then we bring it inside, and then we put it on the stove from there. And when it gets to a right, it's getting a little bit thicker, then we add a little sugar to it, then it kind of crystallizes everything, caramelizes it, and then it gets really, really hard. And then we pour it onto corn husks for drying it. So later on, as soon as it's dry, then we break it off and crush it up like watercolor paint kind of.
You used wild spinach, and then she used a different name, and we have a Spanish name for it. And I'm curious what the Indian name is again, if you would say it more clearly.
How we pronounce it is guac.
Guac.
Yes, but I think they spell it guaco. Is it like G-U-A-C-C-O? But how we pronounce it is guac. Not mimicking the pieces from the 1800s, a lot of them are closed. So like I can create a lot more expression, and it's a lot harder to make them when they're really a little bit that wide. So I don't really, it's rare to get a very traditional piece right now, except for this series and the Vertigo series.
I think with Helen's as well, it was also the air hole. So that was like sort of the, she could coil everything and then, reopen the mouth. So that would be, you have to have one spot that's open so it doesn't blow up when you fire.
So I guess they all have a breathing hole, so most of them tend to be in the eyes.
So it became functional as well as part of the story of her making the pieces.
Question for you, Virgil, on your fashion and your work. Did you overlap with Light Human News?
No, I didn't. I met him one time before, but I didn't have the opportunity to work with him. I know his wife, Aishin, and she lets me see a lot of his older stuff too, but I never worked with him directly.
Yeah, we saw his show over at the Heritage last year.
Yeah.
I was struck by some of his pieces. Looked like early versions of some things.
It would have been awesome too.
Yeah.
Jane and I started collecting Virgil's work about 17 years ago, and we collected the opera singers, and then one day he came to my office and said, "I'm going to show you something." And I went and opened it up, and there is a big white pot with black and orange in it, and I said, "It just happens to be Jane's birthday." Wanted on the spot, of course, I think it's one of the best things that we made. But anyway, to see an artist like this, Virgil, and we go back, as I said, it's about 17 years. To see Virgil evolve to making figures and now ballet dancers and acrobats, and now into all these purses, and he's also done some jewelry, and now to be all involved with Diane Curran. It's to move into many media is just sheer genius, and I can't thank Virgil enough for everything he's done for the community and certainly James.
The new series that I started on in this space, the name is called Vertigo. It's called Velocity. And I grew up with, I love Star Wars. So a lot of hyperspace and a lot of movement, and I was trying to figure out how to create movement in figurative things. So I was looking, if you were just thinking of what velocity would mean to you, and it would be just moving very fast and vibrating, and stopping and going, and hyperspace always comes to my mind. But I kind of experimented with the painting and the building of the actual figures. So I'll let you guys see the first piece for velocity. Show next month. So right now my frame of mind is after we do this presentation is right to the carpet. So